This is an oral history with Jacque Brever, and thank you so much for coming. Today's date is April 9th, 2004, and this afternoon Jacque is going to be at a public meeting at Rocky Flats. We're going to be talking about her experiences at Rocky Flats. And my name is Dorothy Charlo, and I'm doing this oral history for the Carnegie Library Maria Rogers Oral History Project. Excellent, Jacque.
Thank you.
First question is, when and where were you born?
I was born on June 19th, 1957 in Sparta, Wisconsin, in a Catholic hospital. My dad was in the Army, and the nuns delivered me.
And can you tell something about your background, before you got to Rocky Flats? What kind of family did you come from?
We had a large family. There were 5 kids, and my dad, like I said, my dad was in the Army, and he pretty much just came home from wars to make another one of us. And so we're all really close in age. My brother and I stayed the same age every year for 9 days. And we moved around a lot in the beginning, and my mother is a native of Colorado. And eventually, when I was young, 10 or 11 or something, she got tired of moving us around, and she brought us all back to Colorado, and we settled back here. And then they ultimately ended up getting divorced. And I'm the oldest of the 5 children, so it pretty much fell on me to take care of all of them. And I got my initiation into being super responsible. And while my mother worked 2 jobs and went to college at night, and she eventually became an executive for Mountain Bell, which is now U.S. West. And she started out there as an operator. So all the women in my family have been real independent, strong, working women. So going way back to my grandmother was a WAC, and so on. So I wasn't raised I was walking a line in a culture of women staying at home and women being independent and working. So I had this confusion going on, and I thought, well, I could do both. And I did. I ended up taking care of my brothers and sisters and working when I was very young. And
Did you had to take care of your brothers and sisters while your mother was working?
Right.
And then did you finish, what was your schooling like?
I never finished high school. I ended up having to work a lot to help out, and I ended up getting pregnant when I was 24, and I figured by then I didn't want my kid to be brought up, to a high school dropout. So I went on a Saturday and went down to Jefferson County, in some church. They had the GED testing. Didn't study for it or anything, and I sat there from like 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night and blew through the whole GED testing and passed it, just so I could have a high school diploma when my daughter was born. And then I went to college, and I got an Associate of Fine Arts degree at Front Range Community College. Had a few exhibits. Art was my love, and my daughter's dad and I kind of sort of got along, not really, and he had different priorities about life than I did, and we ended up separating when she was like 6 months old, and I raised her by myself and finished college. And he started working out at Rocky Flats when she was a month or 2 old, And up until then, I never even heard of Rocky Flats. Even though I lived here all these years, I didn't know what it was. And so he started out there and he was making great money, and so he suggested that I should go out there too and apply, and I did, and I got it. And the only condition was that number one, I had to work in the cafeteria until I got my Q clearance, which is a top level government clearance. And then the other condition was that I had to take chemistry, physics, and algebra in my fine art degree to work in the process areas as a chemical operator, which I did. And through that, I found I had this just incredible love of chemistry and physics, and it was this whole new world to me that I just absolutely loved. And so I pursued my art exhibits and things like that, but in the meantime, I sort of delved into the chemistry part of it and found that I really had a love for it.
And that came about, now you started working as a chemical operator at Rocky Flats.
Right.
How soon after you?
It took some months to get my Q clearance, and I had finished those 3 classes by then and graduated. I was getting ready to graduate with my Associates of Fine Arts. And so I think I started there, I actually started there in 1982. And I immediately went to Building 771 as a chemical operator, which was the heart and soul of plutonium recovery operations. What we did there was we recovered plutonium and made it in through different chemical processes and made it into a metal button, and that button got sent to the foundry and was shaped into the sphere, the half sphere, which 2 of those together made the pit, which is also known as the trigger for the nuclear weapon. And that was our mission at Rocky Flats, was to make triggers for nuclear weapons.
Now at that time when you were doing that, did you understand about nuclear weapons? What was your feeling about nuclear weapons?
I didn't know a thing about it. All I knew was that I was making more money than I ever made in my entire life, than I ever probably could make in my entire life, and I was just real happy about that. And but I was one of the first women that they hired out there to do that job, and the men didn't want us there, and they were pretty mean to us. There were a few women that paved the way before me, but you know, I came out there and I was sort of vulnerable to their not wanting us there, because I was somewhat sensitive to it. And I learned really quick that you couldn't be that way and survive. So I had to learn to be just as tough and macho and potty mouth and foul mouth and mean as they were in order to learn my job and survive. And what was that like for you? Was it? It was sort of a survival mechanism thing that just kind of kicked in. Of course, the motivation for it was the paycheck. I mean, it was awesome money, and we had all the overtime you could possibly imagine. And I was a union member. Production, it was the height of production, so you could make as much money as you want there. And you know, I remember nights sleeping over in the locker room, spending the nights there, and you know, from snowstorms where the other shift couldn't make it in. And so we made a lot of money, and that was the motivation that just kept me going. And knowing my job, I learned my job, and that's what got me, begrudgingly, they gave me respect after a while.
The fellows? The
fellows gave me respect, and that was because I knew my job, and I knew the processes, and I went out of my way to learn them, and I ended up becoming a crew leader, and I started training other chemical operators. But I had this streak of honesty in me that somehow just didn't fit somewhere sometimes, and I was very protective of them, sort of the mother hen. And so I didn't want him to get hurt, and I sort of
the guys,
yeah, my new guys, and I sort of like took them under my wing, and the newer guys didn't have that history of the older guys, so it sort of worked out a lot better. And we started off with a crew of just women, just women, because the guys wouldn't work with us. And we worked for a foreman out there, his name was Charlie, and so they called us Charlie's Angels. And we kicked butt. We were the best production people, we were the best crew, we worked together great, we kicked butt and made him look so good. And through that, then other foremen started to want us working on their crews also. But Charlie wouldn't give us up. And so eventually we split up. Charlie became a manager, a shift manager, so he wasn't on the floor as much. And they split us up into different crews and farmed us out. And when I first came out there, I expected sort of a lab environment where, we'd go and put our little lab smocks on and make nice with little flasks and vials and things. And I walked in building 771 and looked around and saw all the piping and the brutalism architecture, and it was truly a factory. It was a factory. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? But those paychecks were really nice, and that was why I stayed.
You must have been getting an appreciation of health issues, the potential danger of the work, is that?
The potential danger of the work, yes. The health, the significance of it, not really. We had, spills and leaks and stuff that happened just all the time. It was a regular thing that happened. And all we knew that it was bad. And we didn't really think about or know about the intricacies of the health effects. We just knew it was dangerous and it was bad. And that's where we left it. And and you couldn't survive if you thought about it all the time. So we went into this culture generally of denial and sort of a bravado kind of mentality. And
so in a sense that helped you continue to work there?
Absolutely, you had to. If you sat around and thought about it, you couldn't do it. So you had to forget about it. You had, or deny it, and not focus on it. But if you got it on you, you wanted it off of you right now. So we knew it was dangerous. We just didn't pay attention to it. You couldn't afford to focus on it.
Yeah. Did you? Now, some people have told me that there was a lot of camaraderie, a real feeling of working with a team. Mm. Is that the way you felt?
Well, I felt like we were just one big, happy, dysfunctional family is what it was. I don't know about the camaraderie part as much as we were just one big, happy, dysfunctional family, working through denial. And we were really close. And you just didn't piss each other off. You didn't do that. You just did not do that. And you got little surprises for doing that. Little.
Like what?
Little, dipping your hands in the crit drain and flicking at the water, the radioactive water on someone as they're walking by, and coming up all of a sudden contaminated when you know you haven't been anywhere, then the first thing that you do is you think, okay, who did I piss off? What did I do? You know.
So that happened to you before the FBI arrived?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That was just a part of
it was just a part of working there. And there were practical jokes and things, and sometimes they would get carried away a little too far and things like that. But overall, we were close, like dysfunctional family close, and sort of looked out for each other. But the camaraderie, as the definition in the dictionary goes, I don't know that from my perspective that that's what it was. It was a little bit more sticking together, you know, kind of thing.
Now you were a union member. What was your view of the union at that point? Did you?
Until I worked there, I had no experience with unions whatsoever. And at first I thought, well, you know, okay, they're probably, you know, I knew the history of how unions got started, and I absolutely believed that, you know, that unions were a good thing for workers, especially in our position. But the longer that I worked there and the more exposure I had directly with union officials, the less respect I gained for them by far. Until now, I have no respect for them whatsoever. None. Absolutely none whatsoever. And it's just another political party, you know, and a utilitarian philosophy that's just bizarre, that I just have a distaste for that now.
So you didn't feel even then that they were really helping protect the workers?
I felt back then that they were just mostly there to, we paid our dues, and their job was to make sure that we continued to make good money. And as far as protection goes, again, you know, I think it has to go back to, you know, somebody sacrificing the one to save the whole. You know, that's what I felt like the mentality was. And, you know, I really don't have a very high opinion of them right now. I brought them safety concerns and things that they locked up in the vault in the union trailer.
Oh,
and
at that time?
Yeah, and they refused to pursue it. They didn't want to. They'd only go so far. To me, they would only go so far, and then they wouldn't want to upset the Rockwell managers. So that's what I was witnessing while I was there. I came into an incident one time that was very near a criticality stage, which a criticality is an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. And I came into that process at the beginning of my shift and shut down the line. I mean, it was so incredibly dangerous, you know, we could have all died. And I just shut the process down and refused to start it back up until there was an investigation, and we were told by nuclear criticality engineering how to safely clean it up and start it back up. And got into a huge fight with my management. And so and during that time I had been keeping a work journal. And it was since I started there, and it was just a daily accounting of my activities so that I could learn my job better, because as I said, the men were not willing to, they were not very forthcoming about teaching us how to do our jobs. So I kept this work journal as just a way for me to learn my processes, my operations. And it eventually evolved as I got more education from practical experience, that I was writing down things we shouldn't have been doing, like safety concern stuff. And at that point, this was about in 1986 or 7, somewhere in there, this line was so dangerous that it could have killed all of us. and I shut it down and I typed up some of my safety concerns that I'd been keeping track of. And I filed a 628 safety concern, which was supposed to, over that process, which was supposed to bypass DOE. It was supposed to, Rockwell, and it was supposed to bypass the union and go straight to DOE. And that's how bothered I was by it.
Now, 628, that was the name of the form?
Yes, that's the name of the form that I filled out.
So it was a high level of really urgent.
Yes, very high level, very urgent, very serious safety concern. Mm-hmm. And I filed that. And I typed up part of my journal with the safety concern issues that I had, and I gave it to my union president. And he locked that all up in a vault in the union trailer and said it would cause too much trouble because our contract was coming up and they were going to be negotiating for more pay. And so I insisted and demanded to have an investigation into this really scary, dangerous thing. And I mean, we already worked with scary stuff, so if it was scary, it was really scary. And I went to management and I went to the union and I demanded an investigation, and they had this phony baloney bullshit investigation where they intimidated all the witnesses into not talking, and it was just pretty much me. And my union would not back me up because...
So this was a Rockwell investigation?
Yes.
Or was it DOE?
Rockwell. The DOE didn't even make it as far as DOE, and it was supposed to. And so Rockwell and the union did this phony baloney investigation without my journal. He kept it locked in the vault.
Yeah, and you gave him.
Yeah. And I typed it up, and they came up with that I made the entire thing up because a foreman spurned my advances. And so they wrote it off as sexual harassment, that I sexually harassed the foreman, and didn't investigate any of the safety things at all. And they told me, we'll be watching you, and they sent me back to work. And then after that, I just got a real bitter taste in my mouth about their safety concerns. And 2 months later, Rockwell received an $8.7 million bonus from DOE for safety and management excellence. And we, the union members, received a raise. So that was the end of that one. And then,
how did you feel, did you feel in conflict that, you know, you were kind of risking your life to do this?
I felt, you mean risking my life to make the weapon, the triggers, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, here you tried to raise a major safety issue and hadn't been really responded to.
No, and not only was I not responded to, I was, you know, told I was in trouble for doing it.
Yeah.
And after that, I felt I really didn't want to have anything to do with the wimps that they, you know, because they were all, we'll go and tell the truth, you know, and then they said, well, they threatened them with their jobs, and they backed off. So I had no respect for them. I was disgusted with the whole process, and then I let them know that too. I was disgusted with them, but I still was making a really nice paycheck. And I knew I couldn't make that kind of money on the outside anywhere. So I just sort of let it die away. And it was a bitter pill to swallow.
And how did the other workers treat you at that point?
Oh, then I just got a reputation of being a troublemaker. I really got a reputation of being a troublemaker after that. But there was a direct correlation between me raising concerns about safety and me getting put on punishment detail. and dirty jobs. I got my entire crew taken away from me, and I got put in a room all by myself where there was airborne contamination in the room, and they had put up a full face sign, so you had to put on a respirator to even go in the room. And I was assigned to that room. They took my crew away and assigned me to that room, and someone took the sign off the door. So I had been working in that room not knowing that there was airborne contamination. The air monitor in that room had been set on bypass. So it didn't even, our safety equipment in the room wasn't even working. And so I was constantly receiving inhalation events. And when they finally did put me back with my crew, I found out that the process we were working on was the same situation. They'd been finding airborne contamination all week. And then before our crew would come in to run those processes, because working in a full face respirator is very uncomfortable. It makes dents in your face, it's hot, it's sweaty, you can't talk on the phone right. I mean, it's uncomfortable. So nobody wanted to do it, but I found out that area those processes we were running had been posted as full face respirator areas for the whole week. So, and someone had been taking the signs down before we came to report to our shift. And so they could get production out of us. Excuse me. And so I demanded, once again, for my crew to receive body counts. Back then, they called them body counts, but they weren't really body counts. They were lung counts. And you'd go to the medical department, they would put these instruments on your chest, and they would allegedly read how much plutonium and americium and uranium and so on that you inhaled. And the trick to that is setting the background up really high. I found out later. But anyway, management once again went in there and intimidated most of my crew into not going for the body counts, except for myself and another woman who was on my crew. And we went up there at the same time, and she went in before I did, and she came up positive in uranium, which is one of the elements that we were working with in this process. And they wrote her off and said it was the statistical error of the machine. And every once in a while it just blips and, and gives you a false positive. Well, I went in directly after her, and I came up positive in americium, which is another element that we were working with in that area. And the woman had the nerve to tell me that it was also a statistical error of the machine, and we were both written off as, even though we came up hot, even though we came up positive, that we didn't stand a chance anyway because they were going to write it off. So that's just the way things went. That's just the life you lived, and if you still wanted the money, you just didn't pay attention to it. And you blew it off. You didn't ignore it. You just filed it away and went back to denial mode, and which I did. And then
do you feel that in that sense your experience was typical of other chem operators?
The ones who cared. There were generally, I'm speaking in general here, generally there were two groups of us, the slackers and the workers. And the slackers were the ones who came to work and fell asleep, and nobody expected them to do anything, and they teased them about being slackers, but nobody expected them to do anything. They knew they weren't going to do anything, and they knew that the workers were going to work 10 times as hard to cover their work too. And the workers were the ones that got the hot exposure, that did the work, that got crapped up, that did decon detail, that did, that were there, that, had the camaraderie, I think you called it in the beginning. and that's just the way it was. So there were a group of us that pushed through the denial enough to to raise issues and raise safety concerns, but we were always slapped down so many times that you had to go back into the denial mode to survive. You know, if you wanted the paycheck, that it was all about money. It wasn't there. I did have a sense of pride because I was, you know, playing an important part of the defense of my country, but that was secondary to making a great big fat paycheck. And it was all about the money. And you just had to ignore stuff if you wanted to survive. If you thought about it, you would go crazy. Or you quit. And
did you know of people who quit?
I really didn't. The best you could do is, like a couple of the women that I worked with, they got pregnant. And so they would get moved out of the process area. And a couple people got injured and they would go off for surgeries or workers' comp or something. I mean, you didn't want to leave the plant site. So there were things in the union, under union protection, where you could still make your wage and not necessarily have to be hands-on touching plutonium, you know. So.
Now, when you were working as a chem operator with plutonium, you were making more money than working on the coal side. Is that right?
Oh yeah.
If you had been
right, definitely.
considerably
Yeah.
more.
Considerably more. I made chem op pay, I made hot pay, I made shift differential, all the overtime I could handle, and we got tired. We had all the overtime we could handle, and we'd go back there a lot of times when we just had to babysit a line, babysit a process. We'd fall asleep, and it was freezing cold back there all the time in the winter, and we'd go and we'd sleep on the fluorinator heater, and you know, because it was warm. But the problem with that is that the fluorinator heater was plutonium fluoride, which is very high in gamma neutron radiation.
So we were
inadvertently exposing ourselves more just to get warm. And then
Were you aware of that at that time? The implications of the gamma ray?
Somewhat. We knew the fluorinator had a 6 or 12-inch concrete wall around just that one process. So that we knew that was there for a reason. But you still had to go inside of there and work in the gloves. And you were just supposed to limit your exposure in there, which is hard to do if things are breaking, if things aren't working right, or you know, you have to be in there to do it. But the fluorinator heater was outside of the concrete wall. So it was a place to get warm. And we kind of sort of knew that there was the gamma neutron there, but there weren't any great big fat signs on it saying limit your exposure in this area. We just knew it kept us warm. So does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. The dosimetry department was pathetic. We wore dosimeters. We had wrist badges that had a little dosimeter, and we had badges that we clipped on to our upper torso. And they had these are called TLDs, thermoluminescent dosimeters. And the idea was that we would wear that, and these things would record the gamma neutron radiation that we were receiving, and they would be changed out every 2 weeks, I think it was, or every month. And we'd send them to the dosimetry department, and they'd read our badges, and then they'd keep an eye. The idea was to keep an eye on us to make sure we weren't getting too much exposure. Well, there were several problems with that, in that, number one, they were 2 months behind. So if you got up there past that limit, you got what's called redlined, and they sent these reports back down to your building. And if it came with a red line, management was supposed to take you off of the really hot processes and put you on something that wasn't as hot, Or if you were really redlined, you got put in the cafeteria for a couple weeks to cool off. And they were 2 months behind. Another example is I got redlined once and got pulled into a manager's office, and he accused me of badge tampering. And they put a letter in my file saying that I was badge tampering. There's no way I could have been redlined.
How would you have tampered? People could have done that to get out.
To get out of work. And what they were accusing me of was removing my badges and putting them in a glove and letting it absorb. And they put a letter in my file accusing me of badge tampering, although I had been on this really high gamma neutron line for like 3 weeks solid with overtime. And so the chances, and it was 2 months ago. So the chances of me badge tampering were minimal at best, because that was a hot line. And then they had this thing, they called it no current data available. So if the numbers didn't come where dosimetry department people thought they should come within a range, then they wrote in your file, your exposure file, no current data available, meaning they blew out all the numbers they got. They were no good. And so we got a lot of those, especially when I worked with an experimental product that gave me radiation sickness. And it was an experiment that they had shelved 20 years previous to me getting it. And because of this love of chemistry I had, management came to me and said, try to make it work. And they gave me this old procedure that was handwritten in the margins and everything, and I had to try to make sense of it. But I ended up making it work.
And was this still in 771?
No, actually after the sexual harassment incident, they moved me out of my building too. They put me in a different building 371, and for a while. And I went to 771 for overtime days because they needed certified operators. So I went down there only for overtime after that. And they put me in with this experimental stuff, and it was so high in gamma neutron radiation coming out of the door of my room that my support groups wouldn't even come in there and work with me. And I was working with this stuff 8, 10, 12, 16 hours a day. And my badges constantly came back, no current data available. Constantly, because they said it was impossible that I could get those high of readings in building 371. And they didn't even think about that I was working with this really high gamma neutron stuff that was making me sick. In fact, I got radiation sickness. My hair fell out. I got these big, ugly bruises all over my body. You could touch them, they didn't hurt. My skin was burnt, fried burnt, like the worst sunburn you've ever had.
And this was what year?
This was 88 and 89. 89 was when I actually got the radiation sickness. And my skin was burnt, I was vomiting, and diarrhea. I had this for 3 weeks. I lost 30 pounds. And I went to my management and I said, that's that product. Don't put me in there anymore. You can't do it. And I went to file a grievance with the union because my skin was so burnt that my clothes hurt me. And the company, Rockwell, came back and said they would not recognize my grievance because they don't recognize the skin as an organ. Although it's the largest organ on your body. And they wouldn't take care of any of my medical treatment or anything for that. So I had to go to my family physician, and he's the one that said, well, are you working with radiation? And I said, yeah. And he said, quit. And the company said that it was what was making my skin burnt was a reaction to the lye in which they washed our coveralls, even though I had already been wearing these same coveralls for years previous. All of a sudden I had this allergic reaction, And they went out and bought me new coveralls, and then they sent me right back to work in the same place. Same product, same place.
And did you go back even after your doctor had told you?
I did.
Uh-huh.
I did. And boy, the things we do for money, that was just, looking back on it now, you know, back then I didn't think I could survive without making that kind of money. I gave my daughter never wanted for anything, you know, and we lived in a community that was all Rocky Flats workers, mostly Rocky Flats workers, and so she grew up with these kids, you know, and they were real close, and we never set foot in a Walmart, Kmart, or Target until after I left there. So it's, you know, I've since found, you know, since I've gone into poverty, I have determined that you can live without making a paycheck from Rocky Flats by working with plutonium. And that you can actually survive quite happily. And that was just the way I thought back then.
Yeah.
Very materialistic, very, I don't know, it's hard to describe.
Mm-hmm. Now, what led you, now the FBI raid was in '89.
June 6, 1989.
Yeah. And what led you to, I believe that you talked to them directly, is that right? Can you
Yes.
say something about that?
The FBI came and raided the plant on June 6th of 1989, and they were looking for, they had a big fat search warrant that had allegations of environmental crimes, and they were everywhere. I mean, these guys knew where to go, what offices to go into, what documents to seize. I mean, everybody knew there was an insider that told them, you know, so we knew that. And I had no intention whatsoever of talking to the FBI. I just thought it was cool that the cavalry had come. I just thought that, wow, finally they'll see what a, you know, unsafe place this is, and maybe somebody will do something about it.
So personally, you were pleased?
Yeah, I was pleased as punch. I thought, you know, finally they'll fix some of this stuff around here, and, you know, I had no intention of talking to them. I just had the intentions of watching all the fun of the management freaking out, running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and, you know, it was actually entertaining for me. And I thought, yay, you know, finally the cavalry's here. And but management wouldn't tell us anything, and that sort of raised, you know, red flags. And so we actually broke into a manager's office and stole the affidavit, stole a copy of it, and read in there, and we couldn't.
We knew that there was material in there.
Yeah, we knew there was. We didn't know what. We just wanted to see what they were looking for, because management wouldn't talk to us. It was making us suspicious. And
the we is yourself and other workers?
Myself and fellow chem ops. And
several of you then?
Yeah, several of us. And we were sitting around reading this, and it was the legalese in it was impossible to understand. But there were a few things in there that we no doubt understood. One of them being illegal midnight incineration, and that they had done a flyover and found the incinerator stack hot in December at a time when we didn't know it, but the incinerator was supposed to have been shut down. And so I read in the news, and we were getting most of our information from the newspapers for these 2 weeks. And I read in the newspaper that same thing. That night, I read the same thing, that they were looking for this illegal incineration stuff. And I thought, oh my gosh, you know, that was one of my overtime days in Building 771. And oh, I think we did that, and I thought we were going to go to jail. My crew and I were going to go to jail. And
Were you a crew leader at that point?
Yeah, and I wasn't sure of the day. Because by that time I had beaten into submission of not being so regular about writing in my journals. And I was piecing together different things about the overtime days in 771, taking that incinerator down. And I wasn't sure of the day. And it just so happened that I went to my management and I said, well, I think we did that, and I'm concerned. And they had a little meeting, and little private meeting with us crew, chem ops, and they said the FBI might be wanting to come to talk to some of you, and I don't know about you, but if they come to my house, I'm not going to talk to them. Those kind of hint meetings. Mm-hmm. And Caron was one of my fellow workers. She said, well, you know, if they come to me, I'm not going to lie to cover anybody's butt.
This is
Caron Pitts, yeah. And then right after that, big management, big, like third level management from the top came down to our building and had a meeting with all of us in the whole building, all of us union members and management. And his name was Bill Weston, and he was a big boy in the company. And he said, whistleblowers will be dealt with severely and completely. And I brought my journal back out and started thinking, I better be recording all this stuff again. And recording, because I had just been half-assed, you know, like recording the sickness from that experimental product and recording here and recording there. But this time I knew I better be documenting everything now because something's going on. And he, especially after he said that, whistleblowers will be dealt with severely and completely. And my manager was sitting across, this was in the cafeteria, and he was sitting across the room looking straight at me. And I thought, ooh, this is not going to be good. And afterwards, my manager came up and he said, look, if you know something, you have to tell us. And I said, well, I don't know. I'm not sure of what day it is. Well, I don't remember what day it was. And so he said, well, what would it take for us to prove to you what day it was? And I said, well, you know, I need my time cards. I need the MBAs, the sheets we fill out for putting stuff in and out of glove boxes, and I need the drum labels and just all the documents that I could think of that would help me pinpoint the day and the people I worked with on that day. And what I actually had done was I had spoon-fed them all the evidence they needed to destroy or alter. Because that night, that manager, who was the day manager in building 371, and the day manager from building 771 had spent the entire night in building 771. And I found this out from a fellow chem op who came up to me the next day in 371, and he said, what did you do to D. Sherrell and Steve Dewitt? And I said, nothing. Why? And he said, because they were up all night in building 771 with the door shut. And I thought, oh no. Altering the documents or destroying them or rounding them up or whatever. I thought, oh man, I'm so much in trouble now. And
now you felt you were in trouble because of what you had done or what you had, the information you had given?
Both, because I thought, okay, well, I knew for one that they wouldn't say, well, okay, you did an illegal act, we'll protect you. That was just absurd. I knew they wouldn't do that. But I was afraid because I was afraid the FBI would put me in jail for doing this illegal act. And I was afraid because management, what did they have to gain or lose by getting rid of these documents? Because I went the next day and I said, well, where are the documents? And D. Sherrell said, well, we're rounding them up for you, don't worry, pat, pat, pat. You know, and I thought, oh no, something's going to happen really bad to me now. And then sure enough, that day at lunchtime, my manager came up and gave me a note, and it said report to Rockwell Legal in like 30 minutes. And I thought, oh man, I'm so much in trouble now. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I went and got my union steward, and we went to the manager's office and told him that I would not go to the legal department and talk to them without union representation. So the union steward was busy trying to call to get a union attorney out there as quickly as possible. And the man, Sherrell, the one who stayed with Steve Dewitt all night, he came in there and I said, what is going on? And he said, well, my hands are tied. I can't help you anymore. You've made some serious accusations against the company. And I turned to Caron and I said, see, I told you, we should have went to the FBI. I didn't trust these guys to begin with. We really can't trust them now. We're in big trouble now. See what happens? And I told you we should have gone to the FBI to begin with. And my manager was saying, no, don't go to the FBI, you know, it's just mass chaos going on. And
this was like a few weeks after the FBI raid?
This was a couple weeks, like 2 weeks. Not quite to the day, but 2 weeks. Week and a half, somewhere in there. And it was around the middle of June. And the union attorney could not come out that day from downtown Denver, so he said, well, you at least have to go up to the legal department and tell them you won't be talking to them until I get there. And so we went to the legal department to do that, and it was crawling with FBI. Crawling. And they came over, and we were in you had white coveralls for the hot side and khaki coveralls for when you were walking around the plant on the cold side. So we had khaki coveralls on, so we were obviously workers from the hot side. And we were in the legal department. So the FBI agents came up and took our badge numbers and our badge names. And they said, well, what are you doing up here? And we said, we don't know. And they said, we'll be talking to you later. And that night we talked, Caron and I talked, and the union attorney finally made it out there to the plant site, and they kept feeding him these phony baloney documents that weren't right, and we kept sending him back, and this and then. We were there way past, you know, everybody had gone home for the day, and we were sitting outside the union trailer, and he finally came back and he said, you know, he patted me on my knee and he said, don't worry, they'll find, you know, they'll find your documents and everything will be okay. And you know, and he was patronizing me, and it infuriated me. I just jumped up and I said, don't you see, they patronized you. And we are in some serious trouble here, and we're going to be made the scapegoats for whatever they did. We're in trouble. I knew we were in trouble.
So that was your sense that was growing, that you would be made the scapegoat? Absolutely.
I knew it. I just knew we were going to be made the scapegoats for whatever they had done illegally with that incinerator. And so I drove home, and Caron came over, and we were talking, and I fixed Jessica dinner and did all my mom stuff and tried not to act too worried considering the day, and put her to bed. And she was young then. She was, I think, 8, yeah. And I put her to bed, and Caron and I were talking, and I told her, you know, we're gonna have to do something, because we're gonna get made the scapegoats here. We're gonna take the fall for everything they did around that illegally. And we talked, and we found out there was a hotline number in the newspaper to call the FBI if you had tips. So I ran next door and borrowed the neighbor's newspaper, and we called them and got them to my house, and then told them about my journals and everything. Yeah, they came within an hour. They were there within an hour. And they stayed and took notes, and I told them about my journals.
What was your reaction to how they dealt with you that night?
That night they were very serious about, they were very interested, and at that point I believe that, you know, they were going to protect us. naively believed that they were going to protect us. And the cavalry part of it was gone by then because I was just in fear now. And I believe that they took us very seriously.
Was it a couple of guys?
It was a man and a woman. And they took careful notes, and they seemed very interested. And they interviewed us for a really long time, a couple hours, I think. And so I thought, you know, at the end of that, I told Caron, you know, I thought, well, maybe we'll get some protection out of it, you know, or something, you know, maybe this is the only way we're going to get protection, is because they're going to make examples out of us at work. And and then the next day, I'll never forget this as long as I live. I was sitting in the cafeteria, and FBI agents had taken over an office in Building 371 for interviews of workers. And right in front of everybody in the cafeteria, that guy came out and demanded that I follow him into the back for an interview in front of everybody.
Was this the same guy that had interviewed?
No, it was a different guy,
FBI.
but he was an FBI guy. And I thought, oh, I'm so dead now. I'm in so much trouble. Because by then, management was telling the workers I was going to shut down the plant, make them all lose their jobs, and I was sure I was going to get scapegoated for this illegal incineration, even though I still wasn't sure of what day it was. And now I'm being forced to talk to the FBI. And so it just got scarier and scarier from there, and it just went into this 3-year campaign of just terror and harassment and fear that I still sometimes to this day have trouble with it. And it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And what ended up happening was the company said, Rockwell said, well, you're saying that you processed this material out of the glove box, and we're saying that the glove box wasn't running, that you didn't do it. So they served me with a diversion of material charge. So it just made it worse. All it did was keep making it worse and worse and worse and worse. And they'd up the ante, the FBI would up the ante, and I just felt like I was being attacked from everywhere. And what it boiled down to is that I had to go get immunity to testify to the grand jury because of this diversion of material charge stuff, and the illegal incineration stuff, so that they couldn't make a scapegoat out of me. And
the immunity, how did you get immunity? What?
We had the union attorney who came out there said this was bigger than what he could handle, so they had to get another attorney to help him represent union members who were going to be ordered to testify to the grand jury. And this other attorney was supposed to be protective of the union members, and I found out years later that his bill was paid for by Rockwell. So everything we told him, he told Rockwell, so they could get ready to defend themselves. And I didn't know that at the time, but how it worked, how the immunity worked was this big shot attorney went in and said, well, if you want this person to be a witness to the grand jury, you have to give her immunity from prosecution for illegal incineration or diversion of material so she can talk.
Yeah.
And so we had to go in front of a judge downtown, and those FBI guys were sitting right there behind us, and as soon as he hit his little hammer down, they took us to the FBI offices to interrogate us some more. And that's when I had my journals and all this and that, and I was the first Rockwell employee to testify to the grand jury. And
that was in, had they heard any testimony
they,
from others? Or?
They started, I believe, in August, the grand jury did, and they were hearing testimony from like FBI agents and people building the case. And the actual getting down to the nitty-gritty stuff it didn't come until I started talking. And Rockwell did me a big favor of, besides telling my fellow union members that I was going to shut down the plant and make them all lose their jobs, they further did me a favor by sending out a plant-wide memo to every employee that grand jury testimony for employees would start on Monday and that I would be going on Monday to testify. So they helped that one right along. And just a short time before I went to testify to the grand jury, someone poked a hole in my glove box glove. And I received a plutonium and americium inhalation out of it. And
this was just before you?
Just before I went to the grand jury. And some fellow workers came up afterwards and said, well, that's what you get for making waves. It was sabotage. It was done on purpose. And I still went anyway and testified because after that I was hesitant, but the FBI was saying, well, you have immunity and you have to testify, and if you don't testify, then you will go to jail for the duration of the grand jury, which was 3 years. And I was a single mom, and what was I going to do with my kid for 3 years? So I had to testify. And oh man, I'd never forget that day walking down there with that attorney. I was looking all the buildings. I was thinking a sniper was going to get me, or I was just scared to death. And
did it feel as though there was nobody for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was scared to death, and nobody would talk to me. My family wouldn't talk to me. Nobody wanted to be around me because at work, because if they were guilty by association, and they started getting harassed too. And so
did that include Karen Pitts?
Karen and I stuck together through the whole thing.